afternoon, everyone. My name is Tim.
And I'm Josh.
As you can probably tell by the comfortable way we're dressed, we're both dads.
But we're also designers working on a tool for designers. The tool is called Abstract, and it allows you to version the design work that your team does, guides you through a workflow that we hope helps your overall productivity and really kind of allows the rest of the organization to be able to see how the design process unfolds and participate in it at important moments in time.
So in the next 28 minutes, we're going to walk you through what it's like to design for designers, but also with designers. And we'll be using the history of how we built Abstract as kind of like a guide throughout this presentation.
So this goes back a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away, startup far, far away. My now co-founder, Kevin Smith, and I were working at a small little incubator that I had started called Habitat. And Kevin looked over at me one day as I was literally redrawing the exact same screen at 3 different resolutions. Raise your hands if you've ever been in that position and hated it. And he looked over and he said, "Josh, your tools suck." And I thought, well, that's really not very nice, but you're not wrong. And he's like, no. The drawing tools are great. Actually, you've got like better tools than you've ever had at your disposal. It's just that that's only one part of what designers do. And I'm watching you go work every day, and it's all the work around the work that you're just lacking any sort of structure or support or process. I mean, you constantly export screenshots and put them in Slack and email and Jira, and sometimes you literally will print them on the wall so that people can write notes on them. And I thought, you know what? You're onto something here. And it was interesting because in the last decade, design has really emerged and become a very important part of the majority of businesses out there, their operating strategy. And if you look around these organizations, every other part of the company has a system of record. They have a reliable place where the work is recorded and accountability and transparency is represented. Sales teams have Salesforce, marketers have Marketo, engineers have GitHub, and designers have...
Done.
That's about right. I'm missing probably another 24, depending on where in the world you live. But you know, the things like team coordination, collaborating with stakeholders, interpreting feedback, and actually incorporating that into the design process and the work that you're doing are really critical and actually vital parts of how we practice design. And you know, as a designer who's worked alongside a lot of really fantastic developers in my career, I've often looked over at their workflows and their system of record, things like Subversion, and then in the last decade, Git, which is a version control technology that the majority of engineers in the world use, and kind of pined for something like that. And it was just so clear that design really needed a secure and reliable, kind of stable place we can call home. Khoi Vinh, who's a well-known designer, who's now principal designer at Adobe, even said recently that designers, they still use arcane and, how did he say it? Manual and arcane methods of managing versions. And so it was super clear to us that there is a deep and abiding problem here. And then Kevin looked at me and said, well, why can't designers use something like Git? And it turns out there's really one reason. And it's the files that we use. And it turns out that proprietary binary files that are, you know, developed by companies that want to make sure that you keep using their tools actually prohibit us from being able to kind of have a modern workflow. I was the principal designer at Twitter for a while, and we attempted to use Git for a bit. We ended up using Subversion. And there's some really interesting things that came out of that. We never got the granularity and kind of like parity that our engineering counterparts had. But there's this moment of, oh my God, these aren't my files, these are our files. And that shift from mine to ours and thinking of the work that you do as inherently collaborative from the start was a huge impetus for why we built this product.
While Josh went through all that thinking, like we were looking out and seeing how teams typically did their work. And we noticed that there were patterns that we're shaping into how teams will structure their design work. You had like the folders, and then with the files and the naming conventions. And like a good example of this is like file name, date, person name, and then maybe what they're up to. So we looked at that, and later on we used all that as inspiration while we were trying to figure out like how can we take this workflow that already feels kind of natural to designers, apply it to Git, but then make sure that we maximize the stability and the reliability of Git, and also trying to shortcut as much as we can, trying to automate as much as we can of that whole flow.
And it was interesting because, as I mentioned, the binary file problem, one thing Kevin had said to me was, why can't we use it? And I said, well, the binary file. And he went on to kind of start poking around. And this is one of those benefits of working with a really great, curious engineer. He disappeared for a little while we were working through kind of some more of the conceptual stuff, and came back a couple of weeks later with a working prototype. And the working prototype allowed him to bring a sketch file into the prototype, create a branch, which is just a working copy of that file, make a bunch of changes to it, and create a commit. And a commit is like, think of it like a save, but with comments. And so he was able to do this, and then the magic actually happened, where he was able to take these two files, which are basically versions of each other, and merge them together with the press of a button. My chin hit the table, and I looked at Kevin and said, so are we starting a company? Because this needs to exist. Fast forward.
So back then, Josh and Kevin and I, we used to be internet friends, and every couple of months, like, they would invite me and show whatever they'd been working at. Some things were more exciting than others. So one day, I walked into their office, which was like a room they shared with another company in the back, no sunlight. It was very nice. But
cave.
I think legally we can't call it a cave. But they showed me this entire workflow, and I was floored. I saw it, and I was already planning on how can I quit my current job to join this. Seeing like applying Git technology and thinking to a design file, like, it completely changed how I thought about design, how it could work, how it should work. Yeah. Sorry, I'm still super. I feel fortunate for being part of this whole thing. So I'm really happy that I made the decision to drop everything and join, because it would have been something that I would regret for the rest of my life.
Oh. So. It was interesting because, following on with what Tim said, is there was a lot of excitement, and I don't know about you guys, but definitely have had a tendency to like get really excited, and so you just jump in and get going. However, throughout my career, I have continually found that if I pause right at that moment when I'm super excited, and I stop, and I decide to go and talk to people, and actually identify whether or not the thing that I'm excited about is going to solve the problem that they're actually having, I'm going to come up with a better output. And so, we were tempted, like, we're designers, we are the audience, so maybe we know best. And that's a really tempting thing, an almost subconscious thing to deal with as a designer. But instead, we really wanted to make sure that we were solving real problems, not just trusting our guts. And so, you probably can't see this super well, but what we did is, over the next couple months, we began to send out surveys, and we surveyed hundreds of designers. If you were one of them who took one of those surveys, thank you, thank you, thank you. Because what ended up happening is we got a tremendous amount of feedback on the things that were really painful for designers in their day in and day out practice. And then we send out another set of surveys using Tony Olwick's methodology, which effectively takes the outcome that you'd like to see, and you find out how important it is to the person, and then how satisfied they are with the current solution. And by using this formula, you're able to come up with what he calls an opportunity score. And so if you're trying to figure out what you should actually go design and build, and what problems you really want to kind of like keep the ship pointed towards, something like this ends up being incredibly helpful. And as you can see, If you're unfamiliar with it, it's worth taking a look at Tony Olwick's methodology, but anything over like a 12 is like, oh Lord, please go solve this now, because this is a real pain. And we had a dozen that were well above that, and there were things like, increase the likelihood that feedback is incorporated into ongoing work, instead of being totally stuck because you can't get feedback from the 5 people that you're relying on, which seems like a logical thing that you'd like to have solved. And so this helped us scope and also evaluate every one of the features and kind of product components that we were evaluating. And we would sit there and go, if this was printed out, it was on the wall, and we would look at a feature and say, does it solve any one of these? And if it doesn't, we shouldn't be working on it.
So now that we have proved that what we wanted to do was technically feasible, and like we were basically armed with this list of user needs, our next job was to come up with a workflow that people could use inside Abstract. And we wanted to make sure that this workflow was flexible enough, and we didn't want the tool to feel too prescriptive. Like in the end, it is a tool, and depending on how your team is structured, the size of your team, the type of work that you do, we wanted the tool to guide you through like an ideal workflow, but not force you to use it. And back then, we're 3 designers: Josh, myself, and Frank Camaro. Combined, we had decades of experience. Along the way, we all picked up ideal workflows that worked really well in the situations that we were at. But we also picked up opinions. And even though our backgrounds are very different, there were still a ton of similarities. And that made it tricky, because we couldn't just pick one of our workflows and be like, this is going to be the workflow that we want everyone to use. We also couldn't combine the 3 of them, because it would still be too specific to our little group. The only thing that we can actually do is forget everything that we learned and start from scratch. And we wanted to figure out a way that we felt comfortable telling other people, like, hey, you should design like this, because that's a big ask. And we also wanted to, again, like make it easy to adapt to it, no matter what workflow you're coming from. But most importantly, it was something that we had to do together.
And that notion of doing it together with a beginner's mindset is definitely a point that we wanted to make today, because depending on where you're at in your career, depending on what size team you work on, there's all kinds of different inputs and different contexts. But we've seen over and over that this notion of adopting that beginner's mind and that willingness to be in it together allowed us to overcome a lot of things that I think personally, historically, would have been way bigger challenges, and that we were really excited about. This meant that there's a lot more FaceTime, a lot more whiteboarding. Frank lived in New York, and so we had a lot of Zoom video calls, and we'd fly Frank out, and we'd basically spend an entire week at the whiteboard or on paper sketching things out, really trying to dive as deep as we could. And one of the things that came out of that was this little phrase, say more, which doesn't seem all that big on the surface. But say more became critical to us being able to move forward and make progress. And say more was shorthand, right? It was our way of creating a safe space to share ideas. It was effectively acknowledging that I don't have enough information or context to form an opinion about what you're saying right now, but I trust you. I know that you're a competent designer and that you have good ideas, and so can you please say more? And we found a number of little things like this became kind of like cultural bedrock for us as a team. And say more became like this great shorthand for like, oh my God, I'm creating space for you. And so if you were the recipient of say more, you didn't feel like you were being threatened. You didn't feel like you were being like directly challenged, but instead you were being encouraged to keep going and keep thinking through this and potentially getting to a point where somebody could really respond and react to it. This notion allowed, I think, us to go really deep, given the complexity of the problems we were trying to solve, and the fact that in a lot of ways we were inventing whole new paradigms and interaction patterns. And instead of chopping each other, halfway through a sentence, we were able to create space for each other.
Yeah, and I think you can really feel it in the culture right now. Like if you look at the people not in the room because most of them are remote, but like we managed to scale that, which is something like I'm really proud of. I'm sure you are too.
Same here, yeah. So onward in the kind of like history and the journey, we spent the first couple of months with the whole team really trying to map out this flow. So we were taking the existing kind of Git and engineering-based workflows, and then we were taking the research that we had done about design workflows in general. And it was amazing because there was a lot more overlap than you would think, but then there were definitely discrete areas where there was no clear answer and there was no clear mapping. And so, you know, we found that there's this cadence of starting most things on paper or on whiteboard and trying to exhaust the lowest fidelity possible before going up to the next level of fidelity. So drawing, and then maybe moving into wireframes, moving into high fidelity mocks, and then moving up into prototypes, and rinse and repeat. Do it over and over and over again.
So even with all the research that we've done, all the things that we learned there, and all the thinking that we put in before we actually started the design work, it was actually through the different prototypes that we learned the most. And I think we built at least 3 fully functional prototypes. This is probably the first one. We call it the purple prototype. And like looking back at it, like, we knew nothing when we started this. We had assumptions, we put them together, like even through designing them, like going high fidelity pixels, we weren't able to feel it, to test it. So we did this one. There was a lot of things wrong with it. Picked up some things that we wanted to improve, and then we went on to the next one. And the next one is what we call the gray prototype. And the gray prototype, this was a lot more advanced. We have this notion of you have a workspace, and then there's activity, which we got rid of. It was confusing. But this actually had the ability to open a file, make some changes, and then commit. And we have quite a few end-to-end flows in here. So even till this day, like we occasionally look back at this one and learn from it. Like there was like this innocent. This innocence was in there. Like we were trying to do things that we weren't fully understanding, but now that we have, like today, we have a lot more knowledge about it. So we go back there for inspiration. And then this is the white prototype. It's the foundation of what you see today. Once we put this one together, we all felt like, all right, we're on to something. This is something that we can keep pushing on and actually push across the finish line.
It's worth jumping in and throwing in one little note, which is this version in particular. We, like Tim was pointing out, we learned a lot from the first 2, and this one probably had more iteration than anything else in the history of abstract. At different points, Tim, Frank, myself, even a couple of our engineers were like chipping in and really trying to unpack some of the interesting, there was navigational and UX affordance issues. There were how do we get the right information with the right context at the right time, and like just great IA challenges. But it wasn't one of us. It really was each and every person really contributing to this that got us to this this point.
Yeah, I don't think no single person in the company can take credit for a specific bit. Like everything we do has the entire team involved. But anyway, we took this, spent a couple of weeks polishing it up and making sure that it was actually usable, and that's the point where we started inviting like basically friends and family. Like this is very, very early on.
Yeah.
And throughout this entire process, like kind of what Josh was getting at, like we always try to involve the entire company with design. We want to hear their thoughts, their feedback, their opinions, and that's how we built the product. But especially the engineering team was very, very helpful because they also use Git. So we asked them, like, what are the parts of Git that you love using? What are the core parts that really shape the way you collaborate? What are the bits that work, the bits that don't? And then we took all that and then tried to take a step back and translate it to the design workflow.
And I think one of my favorite moments was when a couple of the engineers on our team looked at us and said, I want to use this for my work. And we thought, okay, we might be onto something. So after more work, our last prototype was really ready for kind of like Tim was saying, the friends and family, getting a few folks to actually incorporate it and use it in their day in and day out workflow. And if you're picking up on a theme of kind of like research and user testing and actively bringing people into the process, that's because that's the message. And it was awesome. We were very fortunate. We had a couple of teams. Big shout out to John Intratter and the Lending Home team, because they willingly jumped in knowing that the whole thing could blow up any point in time. And they were willing to dive in. They got in and gave us feedback daily, and it allowed us to, I think, make more meaningful progress in a like super condensed period of time, which allowed us to go into private alpha. And our private alpha was our opportunity to really start seeing, okay, two things. Can the technology and the infrastructure we've built scale? And does this workflow scale? Like, okay, we've got a team of 3 using it, and we've got a team of 10 using it. That's great. What happens if we can get a team of like 20 or 30 or, okay, maybe 100? And so we just, week over week, we brought more and more folks in. We used Slack as a way to try and manage that feedback actively. And after all of that testing, we finally were able to open up to our public beta last summer. And that notion of being able to put something into the world that you feel can confidently solve some problems, and then hearing from folks, I couldn't live without this. This changed the way I think about putting my, doing my work. And to Tim's point earlier, automating and streamlining some of the things that we do that are tedious, and at the same time creating this level of transparency in the rest of the organization. It was really validating, and I think that's kind of one of those things you're looking for, proof that it actually does solve a problem. But once the product was out, it definitely was time to start iterating. And there were things that we personally were cringing over. There's that great quote, if you're not embarrassed, you waited too long to ship. I don't totally subscribe to that, but there's definitely a nugget of truth in there. We knew there were rough edges, and so we set about very quickly, starting to iterate on those things. Design, honest to God, is never done. And sometimes you get stuck. And many points in my career, you kind of start to panic because, wait, I've already iterated on this so many times. How in the world am I going to find a new answer here? What you got to do is take a deep breath, take a step back, try and give yourself some space, focus on the core aspects of the flow that you're actually working on, and try to focus on the simplest thing first. Build the simplest thing first. Make it easy to tweak, create basically like space for the work to grow. It's okay to care deeply, honestly, about what you ship, because design is emotional. It really is. And I think if there's something that we wanted to share, it's that if you can learn to let go early on, we believe that that has a greater impact on your ability to move quickly, to be less, maybe less defensive, more open, and really to just acknowledge the fact that it's never done, and it's never going to be perfect. But that's okay. Because it turns out shipped is better than perfect.
And we didn't do this alone. We have an amazing user base, like really, really great designers who are always willing to give great feedback. And we learned that as long as you offer people a way to get involved, like a way to voice their concerns or their wishes, they'll help. They will be there for you. And we tried it a couple of different ways. Some were a bit more successful than others, but like Josh mentioned, well, in the beginning we invited everyone to Slack. All of the alpha users were in Slack, and it was just like impossible to manage. Slack was yelling at us because we had too many people on there, and they wanted more money for that. From there, we moved to in-app chat. We had intercom, so people could click a button and start chatting with us. And they were literally chatting with us, with the team that was building it. That didn't scale as we added more people because we were spending more time chatting with customers, which was super fun. But we also kind of wanted to go back to like design and engineering and everything else. We tried a Facebook group, figured out it wasn't really built for it. It wasn't in the right spirit. But today we use a combination of 3 different things. Twitter, obviously. Anyone can get involved in the conversation. It's great. The only downside is there's not a lot of focus. Some context might be missing. some details about like questions or issues that people are having. You might not want to post publicly that way, and you still, at the end of the day, need to hop on a call or an email. We also use Spectrum, which is this forum style tool that we really love. We have some private channels, some public channels, and it's great to see people not just reaching out to the team, but also people helping each other.
Yeah.
Which saves us work, but I love seeing this community aspect of like, we're all using this product, we're all using the same workflow. Let me help you. Let me give tips. Let me share how I work it. And then third, email. Email's never going to go away. That's the thing that we use on a daily basis. And we also do more elaborate research sessions where we'll screen share with a customer, or we'll visit them. We'll invite them to our office. We'll go visit them at their office. We sit down. We offer them coffee or lunch, and then we give them a wireframe, or we just chat about an idea or about what they want, or we give them a click-through prototype, or maybe we're about to ship something and we want some last-minute feedback, so we give them the new feature. Let them log in with their own credentials so they can see their data in this new thing, which is great. All of this buys you time, and it makes it that even if things aren't perfect or not complete, or people are waiting for something or they have questions, like, they will be with you along the way. They will become a fan of what they do, but because you allow them to get invested in the tool, they kind of become part of the team. Yeah. And that's why I love interacting with our customers, I think.
I couldn't agree more, and it's something that we've been really thankful that the majority of our company is active, participates in a lot of this stuff, and from sales and marketing to the support team, obviously, engineering, design, we're all actively trying to spend as much time as we can and what is allowed with everything else we need to do in conversation with our customers, hearing about the nuance. Certain teams are structured certain ways and just have kind of boundaries and guidelines, and if we can learn about that, help them navigate it, and help them be more successful, then at the end of the day, for me, that is it. Hearing teams being more successful, hearing that design is being elevated and is being taken more seriously within the organization, because people actually finally understand what design does. And it turns out, and I've discovered this recently, someone made a comment to me, which was, well, one interesting thing that I've noticed is that design is a lot like magic. And I said, okay, please tell me more. Please tell me more. They said, well, we sit down in a meeting and there's nothing. And we talk about an idea. And then we come back a week later, 2 weeks later, and suddenly there's this fully realized picture that to anyone else looks like the real thing. And as far as anyone kind of normal folks who aren't actively practicing design are concerned, when you go from nothing to something that is real, like this, that's called magic. And I was struck by the notion that a lot of designers, folks have no idea the amount of work that goes into what we do. Most folks have no idea the number of iterations, the divergent explorations, the dead ends that then result in a weird tangent that ends up informing some other thing 2 months later. And being able to expose that to the rest of the company is one of the more exciting things that we've been seeing. And finally, if we could leave you with one last message today, it's stay humble. That humility, that desire to serve your customers, the willingness to be in the process together with your other counterparts, whether it's engineering, product, the business side of things, stakeholders, just having that willingness to stay in the conversation and create space for folks and bring them into the world that you're trying to create is the most powerful thing that I think that we have at our disposal. And staying humble, keeping that as the default mechanism or kind of default behavior that we have in the way that we relate with our colleagues is, I think, the secret to success. And thank you guys so much for listening to us today. We hope that this journey has been illuminating for you guys, and we'll be around this afternoon if anybody wants to say hi.
Cool. Thank you. you.